Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. We've got a very fun Dissected for you today. We've got Transition's full power repeater e-bike, as well as their newly released Transition Relay, which is a lightweight e-bike weighing in around 43 pounds and is designed to be equally fun with or without the battery installed. So stay tuned, we're gonna dive into these two very fun e-bikes from Transition.
Yeah, so good.
So there have been few bikes that have gotten as many questions and comments as the Transition e-bike line. A lot of you out there have been wondering what our thoughts are on these bikes, and to be honest, we hadn't had the opportunity to ride them until this Dissected showed up. So we're really excited to keep these after we film this kind of informational video and share with you our first impressions and put them to the use in a long-term review. Moving into the Transition Repeater, this is your kind of more traditional full power e-bike, you know, over 50 pounds, 630 watt hour battery with a Shimano EP8 drive unit. There are bikes MSRP'd from $8,200 up to $11,000. I do know that at the time of filming this video, there are some pretty decent savings and sales going on. There's kind of some in-between models that are, you know, prior than the T-type drivetrain. So if you're okay with an older style derailleur, you can definitely save a few bucks on some of those bikes. That said, this is a 29-inch wheeled, 160 millimeter front and rear travel full power e-bike. So over here we have got the Transition Relay, which is their lightweight, SL, whatever you want to call that category, but it is built around the Fazwa Ride 60 drive unit. It has a 430 watt hour battery that is easily removable under this cover. It is a 160 29er. In this spec, they also offer a PNW option, which is a mullet bike with a 170 mil front and rear travel. Price points go from $6,800 for an alloy frame up to $12,500, which is what we've got here on our full carbon factory SRAM Axis T-type equipped bike. So right off the bat, you guys can see there are some similarities for sure from travel, wheel size, kind of intended riding application. They both use a similar, you know, giddy-up suspension platform. They're both Transition mountain bikes first and foremost. Where they really start to differ is weight. You know, you've got roughly 10 pounds of weight difference. This bike is designed to be ridden with the battery in or out very easily. So if you're unfortunate enough to live in an area where your local trail advocacy group and the National Forest are working against you for e-bike access, the Relay could be something to consider. We can use the e-bike here legally on service roads or forest roads because motorized vehicles are allowed to drive. However, once it comes to this sweet single track here, e-bikes are not allowed. So what you could do is self-shuttle yourself up the road, just like any other vehicle is allowed to do. Quickly pull the battery out of the frame, put that back in, lock it up, and then go find a stash spot, and you're perfectly legal, I think. We spent quite a bit of time talking to the folks at Transition as we were studying and working on this feature. And, you know, this bike was released first, and Transition knew they needed an e-bike to keep up with the times and what people were demanding out on the trails and in shops. And so this was a bike that they made, they produced, and they were able to get done. This bike, however, we were told is what Transition was most proud of. This was the e-bike they wanted to build, and that's why it took them a little bit longer.
I really like that bike. I ride it sometimes without the battery. There's a, you know, kind of like our internal free ride crew here that likes to just go and ride and hit jumps, you know, and so they'll grab the relays and go up and like pull the battery out in session jumps, you know, and have a very similar experience that you would have on a normal bike, where they would never go do that on a repeater.
You know, Bellingham has a pretty unique terrain feature set, riding style, And some of the specifications for that ride application are very present in both bikes. They took a lot of time, in fact a year, in testing to develop their own proprietary tune with Shimano on the drive unit for the full power bike. And what that means is essentially their goal was to have riders be able to drop one power mode from what they normally ride on another e-bike, right? So instead of being in boost, you could ride this in trail, or if you're someone who normally rides in trail, you could put this into eco. And how they achieved that was basically by increasing the power, the responsiveness, and the assist from each mode, so that essentially you're getting more power than you would in many other bikes in their factory Shimano tune. What this also means, however, is if you are a boost rider or turbo rider like we are, you will burn through that battery a little bit quicker. Of course, the Shimano eTube app lets you quickly customize the responsiveness, assist, and power delivery. So moving on to the Ride 60 equipped relay, of course, 60 Newton meters of torque, so it is going to be competitive with a lot of the other lightweight SL type e-bikes on the market. It's got more than enough torque and grunt to get you up some really steep climbs. And again, if you want to remove that battery, if you're riding somewhere that e-bikes aren't allowed, you can very quickly drop that thing out and have a respectable weight enduro bike that you can go out for a pedal on. Talk a little bit about the Geo, and then we'll get into the ride impressions of the repeater and relay. So we'll start off with the repeater here. This is a fixed geometry bike, unlike the relay, which does have a flip chip. Both bikes are a size large, but we'll get into the Geo numbers here of the repeater first. The size large that we're riding here has a 480 millimeter reach, a 640 stack height. The seat tube angle sits at 77.4 degrees, while the head tube angle sits at 64 degrees. The chainstays sit at 455 millimeters, giving the bike a total wheelbase of 1,280 mil. There's a 30 millimeter bottom bracket drop for a roughly 340 mil bottom bracket height, giving the bike a pretty well-rounded and neutral geometry setup. I think it will do a lot of riders well. It is, with a 64 degree head tube angle, a little bit more on the aggressive side, but that's sort of what this bike's intended application is. So as I mentioned, the relay has an adjustable Geo chip at the lower shock mount, which will let you put the bike in high or low position, as well as adjust if you're running a mullet wheel size setup. So the reach goes from 485 to 477 millimeters. The stack height is 637 or 643 mils. You've got an effective seat tube angle of 77.8 or 77.1 degrees, and a head tube angle that sits at 64 or 63.3. The chainstay length is 448 or 446 millimeters, and a total wheelbase of 1,280 or 1,282. The bottom bracket height sits at right around 350 mil with a 25 mil bottom bracket drop with the 29-inch wheels. Of course, the P&W spec version with the 27.5 will change that, as well as some of the Geo numbers. So with the Geo out of the way, let's get into some of our first ride impressions and which bike we think we'd most likely choose for ourselves. So we've had these bikes for about a month now in the filming and creation of this Dissected. And of course, as we say, these are not intended to be our long-term reviews. A month is definitely not enough time for us to thoroughly conduct and pass bikes around. So these are our initial impressions after spending quite a bit of time on both of these bikes. And something I think is worth noting, I consider myself to be a full power e-bike convert. If I'm riding an e-bike, I've pretty much always said I just want a full power e-bike because I want to go faster, further, and get more descending in. The relay might be changing my mind on that, but let's get into some ride impressions and notes. So we'll follow the theme and stick with the repeater first. Overall, I think that this bike rides well. It is composed, capable. I like the suspension platform. Obviously, it's a bit heavier than the relay, but it still feels like it gets off the ground nicely. It is pretty playful and poppy, which is something I like. I think transitions are known for making pretty jumpy and fun bikes, and the Repeater certainly is that when it comes to, you know, comparing to other e-bikes on the market. Transition's factory preset that they've created for the Shimano drive unit may not be for everyone. I don't know that it's something that I would keep if I was looking to maximize mileage or elevation. I definitely understand for where they ride in their application that it probably has some merit, but the cool thing is that it's really easy to get into Shimano's eTube app. There are 2 profiles that you can preset in here by just toggling between on the fly. So, you know, it might be worth just setting one preset that's a little more conservative or normal to, you know, others, or what you find most beneficial for your area, and leaving the other preset in transitions mode. But I just found that it did eat a little bit more battery, especially since we're riders that like to ride in boost or turbo all the time. They just crank it up a little bit higher, and that does make a difference when you're out with other riders on 630 batteries. So aside from that though, overall, so far impressed and pleased with how this bike rides. It's yeah, something that we'll definitely be putting a lot more miles on as we keep for a long-term review in the future. I would say it sits right in the pack with other kind of aggressive 160 mil enduro ready e-bikes. So yeah, that's that. We'll move on to the Relay, which this is a bike that really impressed our whole crew. So far we've had about 3 different testers on it. And it's really fun. We are very happy with how this bike rides. I know a lot of the commenters have asked, are we going to experiment with putting it in the P&W setup? For the riding that we do, I think it would be overkill. You know, we're using max travel, we are bottoming it out, but we like how playful and lively and fun the bike is in the 29-inch wheeled and shorter travel version. This Float X shock, I'm a huge fan of the Float X shock. It is so active and springy, and I just really like a bike that is, you know, up and poppy and active, and this bike does that well. And there were definitely times where we would kind of send it deep into some big bomb hole braking bumps, and this thing would just stay composed and keep riding. We did try taking it to the bike park and pulling the battery out. We got about 3 laps in before we were told, even if it doesn't have a battery in it, if it's got a motor, it's an e-bike, and we can't ride it in the national forest. You know, that may not be the issue at your local mountain, but certainly something worth noting, because that is something Transition kind of markets on their site. You know, hopefully as time goes on, things will change here in the US, but for now, it's kind of a roll of the dice. But nevertheless, we did put some time on the bike with the battery removed. You know, you get into a weight range with that battery out that's on par with lots of our other, you know, heavier, burlier built enduro bikes. You know, we would go out with friends on their enduro bikes that weighed with, you know, within the same weight, and we could go out and ride. There wasn't a huge difference in the drag or the weight. So, you know, I would say if you're used to pedaling a big, heavy enduro bike that's got, you know, this much travel, you're not going to have a huge penalty once you pull that battery out and take it out for a big ride. It is noticeable, but it's not a deal breaker. This is just a very fun, playful, and capable bike. It's just really well-rounded, and it's a bike that we look forward to putting a lot more miles on to make sure that it holds up, nothing falls apart. We don't have any issues with the drive unit or the electronics, but so far so good. And yeah, when we talked to Lars and Transition, they said this was the bike that Transition envisioned when they said, we want to make an e-bike, and it shows. I think they've done a good job here. So please ask any questions that you guys might have down below. Again, this isn't the long-term review. We're going to take all your questions and comments, things you want to know about these bikes, into account as we continue to ride and put miles on these things. And you'll be excited to know, coming up soon, we'll be doing an SL lightweight e-bike roundup and group review, and this will be one of the bikes in contention. So let us know what other bikes you'd like to see in there, what questions you have, and of course, which bike you think is for you. Are you a full weight, full power e-bike convert, or is the SL something you might look at? I was leaning this way, but I gotta say, after riding the Relay, this could be the one for me. So stay tuned for more. Thank you guys for watching. Please don't forget to subscribe, and we'll see you out on the trails.